Welcome to the Today Counts show. Today does count because it impacts, it influences your tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. The Today Counts podcast is sponsored by the generous donors of the Lead Today community. I'm your host, Kim Piper. Welcome back to the Today Counts show. And today I have with me somebody who is, I can tell you right now, a kindred spirit. They call him Dr. Joe. His name is Dr. Joe Martin, and he is the president and founder of Real Men Connect. So I know that I just want to qualify some things before you say hello, Dr. Joe. I'm just going to call you Joe if that's okay. Sure. But I just want to say a couple things. I can tell you right now, with a little bit of time that Joe and I have had before I hit the record button, is obviously we're going to be talking about men. I mean, he is the president and founder of Real Men Connect. I don't know if you missed that, but Real Men Connect. And we have some pretty strong feelings about men in society and the role of men. And so, ladies, I think you will get a lot of benefit out of this, but don't get your nose bent out of shape if you think we're speaking in heavy terms or in Flintstones terms or some kind of a weird thing. So we obviously believe in masculinity. We believe it's a good thing. We celebrate it. And we believe that is God's intention. And we believe that God's intention is that, if you can call it perfected masculinity, is only good for society and for femininity. So, but we both work with men a lot, and this is going to probably become a pretty exciting conversation. Dr. Joe, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jim. It's my pleasure.
So you started this organization. It's a 501c3. Now, for those who are not familiar with that term, that's a nonprofit IRS category where it's typically donor supported, but it can also be supported by subscriptions, by memberships, by fees. It's a 501c3 is a business organization. The difference is that nobody owns it. So though Dr. Joe Martin began this 501c3 and he's the steward of it, he doesn't own it. It is for the greater good. That's the purpose of why Real Men Connect has begun. Now, Dr. Joe, you told me offline, so to speak, that you have a background in education. Touch on that a little bit. And why are you investing yourself into this men's ministry?
I told you earlier, Jim, that I started in education. It was I felt my calling that God had put in my heart based on the way I grew up as a kid. I was the first person in my family to ever graduate from high school. Grew up in the inner city hood ghetto in Miami, Florida, in a place called Liberty City. And for those of the listeners out there, if they've never heard of a place in Miami called Liberty City, if they ever heard of a video game called Grand Theft Auto, there's a version of Grand Theft Auto that is a Liberty City version.
Okay.
So whenever they're doing a video, Jim, about your neighborhood, it can't be good. Okay. They're doing a video game about it. But no one in my family ever graduated from high school. I was the first one. And I barely graduated from high school. But to make a long story short and how I got into education, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, graduated early at the top of my class at the age of 20, and made history in the state of Florida by becoming the youngest professor ever hired to teach as a professor at the age of 24. Wow. I had my doctorate degree by the time I was 28. And so what drove me into education was the fact that I was told I was not college material. Well, I was not smart enough to go to college. Matter of fact, I was thinking about joining the military, and I asked this recruiter about, should I try college first before I joined the military? And he said, Joe, you're a nice kid, and I like you and everything. He said, but I wouldn't do that if I were you. I said, why not? He said, Joe, because I've seen your test scores. He was talking about the SAT, SAT stuff. I said, yeah, so what's the problem? He said, Joe, your scores are low. I said, yeah, I know my scores are low. I said, there's a lot of kids with low test scores. He said, yeah, but your scores are so low, they won't let you drive by college. That's what he told me. At the time, now, Jim, you're laughing, but at that time, it wasn't funny to me.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
It was an insult, right? So I went to college just to prove this dude wrong.
Right.
Do you know my first semester in college, I signed up for 17 credits, which is crazy as a freshman. You don't think
Yeah.
that's too many.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's a lot.
I finished that semester with a 4.0. Now, never got a 4.0 after that. That first semester 4.0 ended up graduating early, top of my class. And I was voted student of the year on my campus. It was a pretty small campus, about 10,000 students. But I was voted student of the year at my university. And so I went into education because I felt I had a story to tell. Because how do
Sure.
you go from being the first person in your family to graduate from high school and barely getting into college to now become a university professor and graduate top of your class, all this other stuff? And so I went into education so I can give kids like me hope. That's why I did
Mm.
it. And so I started doing that, and I don't know what happened, but the word got out because I was a young professor, so I was like close to their age.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I'm making all these connections, and before I knew it, I started getting other professors asking me advice. How are you connecting with the kids? And then I started being asked to lecture at other campuses to talk to their faculty on how to connect with kids. Well, that was over 550 campuses later as I traveled.
Wow.
Then from the
Wow.
campuses, the people who heard me speaking on the campuses said, wow, he needs to be working with the teachers in the school districts of how to connect with kids. So that
Mm.
ended up turning around to me going to probably about over what, probably over 900 school districts across the world. So I became this top, I guess, top tier educational consultant who could help students achieve more, showing teachers how to connect with students, and also helping teachers navigate the stress of their jobs in connecting with our kids. Well, I was doing that and loved it so much, I would have done it for free. And then all of a sudden, I started thinking, wow, we're not really addressing the real issue, because I started noticing the issues that my students were having and the other students were having. It all pointed back to the home. And there was some type of wound from some type of trauma, whether it was from mom or dad or some type of their family unit. And I started looking at my own childhood, because what I didn't tell you is my story about the trauma that I went through growing up without a dad in the home. My mom was a teenage mother with two kids by the time she was 17. And I struggled. And what I didn't tell you is that you saw what I achieved early. I achieved all that before I reached the age of 30, a PhD, university professor. I had written 2 books, started my own business, a clothing store at 22 years old, had my first home when I was a senior in college, bought my first house when I was senior in
Hmm.
college, had it all by the time I reached the age of 30, Jim, and lost it all by the time I reached the age of 40,
Hmm.
because my past came back to haunt me. The reason why I achieved
Okay.
so much, because I was
Yeah.
overcompensating for
Yeah.
being sexually abused as a child. My mom struggling with her alcohol addictions. My dad not being there, watching 6 of my friends get murdered in front of me, and a lot of other stuff that I saw and witnessed as a child that I told nobody about. And I thought if I just achieve a lot, I can keep it behind me. And I didn't, because it came back
It's
to
like,
haunt
yeah,
me.
it's like you were running from it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I was
Yeah.
running from it. So from the world's point of view, I had succeeded as a male. I was
Right.
also married and had a child, and that's why I was failing as a man, because I
Hmm.
didn't know how to be one. So
Hmm.
now let's
Yeah.
forward back to me being an educator, and I'm working with all these school districts, and now my life has turned around because I got it all back by the time I reached the age of 50. All right. And so I'm watching these kids. I'm thinking, wait a minute, the problem's not in the classroom, it's in the home.
Hmm.
And one day I was consulting with a school district up in upstate New York, and I was working with some of their toughest kids that they had there. And I went to go talk to the teachers. I had a training session with the teachers afterwards, kind of like a debriefing. And I asked the teachers, and this is when I walked away from education. I asked the teachers, I said, I just learned something from talking to the worst kids in your school district. I said, something hit me, and I need to confirm this with you. I said, if you've
Yeah.
been in education for more than 15 years, raise your hand. And it was about maybe 70 teachers in it. So it probably about maybe 75% of the room raised their hand. I said, now we all as educators, I said, the adults are not around, parents are not around, so let's keep it real. We all have kids we had a kid in our class who we wanted to strangle. You know what I mean? That one that you think,
Sure.
I can't do this
Yeah.
job. My job would be so much easier if Jim wasn't in my class. And
Yeah.
so I said, let's be real. We all had that student. I don't care if it was your first year teaching, your 10th year teaching. I said, now with that being the case, I want you all to think of that one child that you just couldn't stand. I said, do you have them? They said, yeah. Could have been boy or girl. I said, I want you to think of this. Of those kids, that kid, how many, I want to, by show of hands, how many of those children had a strong male role model in the home? And Jim, how many you think out of those probably about that raised their hand was probably about 50 teachers raised their hand. How many you think
Mm.
raised their hand?
Oh man.
Take a guess.
Yeah, zero.
Zero.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was zero. Now, notice what I didn't ask. How many had a strong mother in the home? If
Mm.
I asked that, it probably been more than half those 50.
Right.
But
Right.
now, but look at that correlation.
Yeah.
What do they
Yep.
all have in common? They didn't
Yeah.
have a strong male in the home. So when you
Yeah.
qualify this by talking to your listeners who are women, no, women need to listen to this too. They
Yes,
need to hear
absolutely.
this because it blew my mind. It shocked me. And I
Hmm.
said, wow. And then I made this statement to them. I said, guys, look around the room. Not one. I said, now, the reason why I got this epiphany, I said, because your students who you couldn't stand told me were the worst kids in your district, they asked me to bring my daughter with me the next time. And I couldn't understand why. And I asked them, why do you, I said, can I ask you a question? How many of you, because I realized they just wanted to see a dad with his daughter. So I said, how many of you have a strong male in the home? Not one of the kids raised their hand. I said, now they wanted to see my daughter. They didn't ask to see my son. They wanted to see my daughter, which was weird. All right. But then I asked, so then I told the teachers this, and this is when I decided, okay, enough's enough, God, I gotta go. I said, now let me prove, if this doesn't prove it to you, nothing will. I said, they want to see my children, your kids. You never met my kids. They don't know anything about my kids. You don't know anything about my kids. I have a son and a daughter. I said, now I can tell you this. If we move to upstate New York and I put my kids in your district, in your school, they will be in your classrooms. I can't promise you they'll be the smartest. Can't promise you they'll be the brightest, the most talented, the most gifted. Can't promise that because my kids, they just kind of average. Right? I said, but what I can guarantee you is that they're going to be respectful. They're going to be attentive. They're going to listen to you. And you might even say they're a joy to have in your class. They're not going to cause you any problems, any trouble.
Yeah.
I say, you know why I can guarantee that? Because I'm their dad. In
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, I'm realizing now that that's the problem. We need more dads that will make your jobs easier. And so
Hmm.
from there, that's when I accepted the call that I said, I got to do something different. So I left what I loved and I was passionate about to now reach back into the homes to say, now I got to go on a mission field to find these fathers who want to be good dads. They want to be good husbands. They want to be good leaders. They want to love their wives better. They want to raise their kids to be productive citizens. But the problem is, and they don't want to admit it, they haven't been taught how to do it. They're trying to figure it out on the fly. I was one of them. I ruined a 16-year marriage with a woman I loved because I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But after I
Yeah.
met a man who mentored me and coached me, who had 8 kids and poured into my life, now I knew how to be a husband, how to be a father. And now I'm in my second marriage and doing it the right way now. And now I'm teaching other men and we're doing it in community, teaching each other. You know, it's funny. I come from an education background, and when kids come to us, we have to diagnose them. You know, what if they have a learning disability, dyslexia, you know, what kind are they ADD, ADHD, you know, all this other stuff, all the alphabets. I said, but I realized once I got into this field working with men, I found out that pretty much a majority of men out there are suffering from an undiagnosed learning disability. It's not
Mm.
ADD, ADHD, or any of the other alphabets. It's ABT, ain't been
Mm.
taught.
Yeah. Ain't been taught.
Because
Yeah.
when I asked the average man, I said, do you want to be a successful husband, father, and leader? 100%, Jim, say yes. But then I asked that same man, did you have a strong male figure in the home to teach you? I didn't even say dad, just a strong male figure to teach you how to do that. And less than 10% say yes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. How many men do you run into where they are consciously aware that they ain't been taught, right?
When their marriage falls apart.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the symptoms have got to happen in front of
Yeah.
them before they realize, hey, I'm over my
I'm
head.
over my head.
And
Yeah.
but that's got to be a huge shipwreck to a man's ego, because men in general don't even know how to ask for help.
Right.
They don't know how to ask for companionship and for partnership. It's fix it myself, pull myself up by my bootstrap. Yet that's kind of a contradiction because I mean, when you talk about these men with what's called father wounds, in the past few decades, is it mostly absenteeism fathers or is it fathers? Okay, it's not.
It's
So
both.
they're there.
It's absent fathers, emotionally absent fathers.
Emotionally absent
Yeah.
fathers. So they're there, but they're not there.
Yeah, I actually use
They're
I
not
use a
present.
military term to kind of describe the kind of dads. And one I
Okay.
call him, I said missing in action. He wasn't
Okay.
there. He abandoned the family. I call
Yeah.
it the POW, prisoner of war. That's
Okay.
the dad who's always angry.
Okay. Yeah.
You got to walk on eggshells around him because the stress of life is getting to him, and the kids are
Yeah.
afraid of it, and so is his wife.
Yeah.
That's the prisoner of war, I call it. You got the AWOL dad that he comes in. He's missing. Not only is he missing in action, he's absent when they need him the most, and that could be
Yeah.
emotionally. And then we have what I call the reservist dad. He only shows up once in a while. So there's different scenarios that can cause the father wound. Now, what we're striving for is what I call an active duty dad. He doesn't
Okay.
necessarily have to live in the home, but he can be active duty. He
Yeah.
can be there when the child needs him. So when we work with men who dealing with on all ends of the spectrum. They may be living in the home with the family. They may be away from the home from the family. They may be estranged from with their ex-wife or whatever it may be. But we teach them how to stay in connection with their kids so they can still continue to be a parent. But you're right, Jim. Most of them come to us. They don't want to. They hate to admit that. Wow, I need help. I don't imagine this. I had to admit it when I guess I was 37 years old when I had to admit I don't know how to be a man. Here I am with more degrees than the thermometer,
That's
made
right.
more money
Yeah.
than I could spend,
Yeah.
had all the accolades and written books and everything, and I didn't know how to be a man, and I had to tell
Yeah.
another man that. Now, how do we get men to overcome that? I learned now the best way to get men to admit it is for me to admit it first.
Mm.
And so I share my story. That's why I speak all over the country at men's conferences, men retreats, churches, like I told you, university and college. And I talk about my childhood. I talk about that father wound. And what that does, that gives that other man permission to come to me. Because I can't tell you, here's a great example of this, Jim. They said the statistics tell us that 1 out of every 4 girls are molested and abused as children. 1 out of every 4 girls. 1 out of every 6 boys are molested as children. Now, here's the thing. I was sexually abused as a child, and I see thousands of men. Most won't tell you they were until somebody else admits it first. And when I
Yeah.
admit it, guess what ends up happening? They come.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
remember the saddest story I heard was this one guy who came to me at a men's conference, and he says, "Joe, I was sexually abused as a child." He says, "And you're the first person I've ever told that to." The dude was 68, Jim.
Joe, do you know when it comes to the boys, 1 out of 6? Do you know any of the stats? Is it by an older female? Is it by a man?
Now
Do we have any?
now they don't have statistics on if it's male or female, but what I can tell you based on my
Yeah.
experience of what I call the straw poll of just the men I meet
Yeah.
is primarily done by other males, which has caused a
Okay.
whole nother set of problems. I was sexually
Yeah.
abused by a male. That caused a
Okay.
whole other problem when we talk about identity
Yeah.
and all kinds of stuff.
But
There's a lot who've been sexually abused by women too. But the
yeah,
majority
yeah.
seems to be, for what I see, has been men abusing men.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a boy before puberty or approaching puberty or in puberty, and you have a older girl or woman, I mean, I've heard that, I've seen that, where that happens, whether it's for experimentation or whatever. The point is, it's still abuse. You got me thinking about something here. When it comes to you first telling others about your story, I think the power of that is that even though those listening may not be able to articulate it like this, you're not just somebody who has something to share, but you become a safe place for people to then engage in the conversation. Right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I think that's powerful. I think that when leaders are trying to raise up other leaders, as what I try to do. When I always come in, if I come in as a know-it-all, if I come in as somebody who's never made any mistakes, people don't find a whole lot of value in that. But when they find out, they're entering into a crossroads, and you're able to say, hey, you know what? I've been to this crossroads before, and I haven't always made the right turn.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about it. And, when they hear that you're coming from a place of not just experience, but humility, and then it opens a door of conversation. Just the other night, I had about 13 men over here at the house. For about a few hours, it was by invite only, kind of up and coming, young men and leaders, and some really aren't that young, but as I get older,
everybody looks young.
The bar for young gets older and older. But anyway, we were just hanging out for like the first 45 minutes, not really doing much of anything. We had cornhole toss in the backyard and had some music on and just hanging out. Then we had the pizza show up and the drinks and whatnot, and we did that. And then we entered a time where we looked at Psalm 1. And we talked about really what it meant to be healthy men and healthy leaders. And Dr. Joe, that was, I've done a lot of fun things already in 2024, but that right now is standing out as the highlight of my year, because what I didn't expect was what I sensed. They were engaged in this conversation. It was, there's no women around. Mm-hmm. We just got to be us. And I shared some of my failures from childhood, from leadership.
Right.
And as soon as I did that, it just kind of, opened up the floodgates of communication, coming back to your point. And it was so refreshing when I watched those men drive off one at a time, and I came back into the house completely exhausted, but refreshed. And I thought, this is legitimate ministry. And so I know that what you're doing is making a difference. It's just a powerful thing.
Yeah. And what you're saying, and I'm hoping that the listeners who are hearing you can really grasp the wisdom in what you're sharing. Where the truth of the matter is, as men and women, we're all hurting. We're just hurting to different degrees. But in that sense of that hurting, if we can accept the fact that none of us have it together, right. We're trying to get it together.
That's right.
But all of us are hurting. None of us are Wonder Woman and Superman. That's not us. But we're all hurting to different degrees, and we're all, and here's what you said, we're all looking for a safe place to go, to grow, and to share, and to heal. And the problem is, Jim, we don't always create those places for people to come. So when I'm speaking up on a stage, or when you're having a retreat, having a get together at your house, what you're saying is that this is a safe place for you.
Yes.
You're among.
It has to be.
Yeah, this has to be. This is a safe place for you to come, so you can share. You can heal, you can grow, you get to meet other people. And this is what one of my best friends taught me. Here's a safe place for you to go. Here's a safe place for you to come. But love is saying, I'll go first.
Yeah.
And so I got to open up my heart. And like you did with those men, let me tell you what I've done right. Let me tell you what I've done wrong. Let me tell you what I'm still learning. Let me tell you what still is slowing me down. Let me tell you what's helping me. Let me tell you what I love. Let me tell you what I'm afraid of. And when you become that real to them, you're giving them permission to say, wow, him too?
Yeah. You know what we got to talk about, which some of it was planned and some of it wasn't planned. The part that wasn't planned is that we ended up talking about the difference between guilt and shame. Mm-hmm. And that was so powerful, because when something's done to you, or you've done something out of complete ignorance, it's like shame, and you can't wash it off, right? It's not, when you're guilty of something, you made a mistake, you made a mistake, at least you're able to admit it and then ask for forgiveness. And that is a sanctifying, transforming process out of that mud hole. But when something's done to you, how do you wash that off? How do you, because you still feel guilty, but it's deeper than guilt. It's shame. And then that's one thing we talked about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. The other thing that we talked about is with men, we tend to start with how things are going in our world, at work, our identity is in our work, it's in our money, it's in our stuff, it's whether we win or lose. And then that kind of like backflows. We have these little adapters in our water system so that sewage doesn't backflow into our house. But when we start on the outside, and we find our meaning, our identity on those kinds of things, it backflows into our relationships. It poisons our relationships at home, especially, and then it poisons us. Instead of starting on the inside, who am I in the Lord?
Mm-hmm.
Who did God make me? What is the truth about me from God's perspective? And then let that overflow into my relationships, and then let that overflow into what we called our place. So what we talked about, Joe, is we talked about having a healthy person then allows us to have healthier people relationships. And then that allows us to bring better health into our places in life. And that was kind of the night when we talked about that. But what are your experiences with how men identify their value and their worth, and then shame and guilt and the father wounds and all that? You've already touched on some of the father wounds.
Well, I'll start with the guilt and shame because I'll make it simple for the listeners, because we deal with this a lot with men. Is one of the core issues, because we tend to clump guilt and shame in together. They're not the same.
They're not, exactly.
That. And the way I simplify for our men when we're teaching our men, I say guilt is when you did something wrong. I did something wrong. Man, I shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. That was my fault. I did that. Boy, that never should have happened. Man, I apologize. Oh, please forgive me. I did something wrong. There's nothing wrong with you feeling guilty. It's part of confession.
You have a conscience.
You have a conscience. Thank God.
That's a good sign.
I did something wrong. But here's where shame comes in. Shame is I did something wrong. Shame is something's wrong with me.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
I'm worthless.
That's good.
I'm nobody. I'm just a screw up. I'm never going to be good enough. See, now we're taking on what we did as our identity.
And if we listen to the wrong people and the wrong ideas, it can actually cause us to believe what you just said, that there is, I mean, it's a play on words, right? Because there is something wrong with us from a theological perspective,
but we're not worthless.
Yeah, exactly. But not in the way that you and I are speaking of, where God has turned his eyes from us and he can't deal with us, and he doesn't even want to deal. He doesn't even want to look at us. That's what we can begin to believe, because if humans treat us that way, and then it's a natural progression to believe that God might look at us that way.
And that's the problem. The struggle is we believe, and now this kind of transition to what you were asking about with identity, which is my wheelhouse, which that's probably the biggest revelation I've received in working in this capacity in this ministry is I knew identity was an issue that we had as men. I just didn't know to what degree it was an issue. And it is, I would tell you, I will venture to say this is about 99% of our problem. Because we identify ourselves based on what we do. Now, the way I describe it is I call it the ations. And I can prove it. And you've seen it happen millions of times, Jim, working with men or being around men. Most of us, we define ourselves based on the ations. One is our occupation.
Yes.
And how do I know this? Because I've been on at least 1,000 flights. And Jim, do you know, out of all the flights I've been on and all the passengers who've talked to me, not one has ever started by asking me my name. Guess what they asked me first? What do you do?
What do you do? We talked about that last night.
That's what we do. We identify based on what we do. Occupation. And when you tell somebody your occupation, here's the next thing we set up our identity based on. Then is compensation. Based on what you tell me you do, I can kind of guess that you get paid a certain amount. If you told me you were a checkout cashier at the Walmart, or you told me you were a brain surgeon, guess what? I'm already making some assumptions about who I think you are based on your
Yeah.
occupation and your
Yeah.
compensation. Here's
Yeah.
another one that we base it on. And all these are faulty, what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
All these are faulty.
Yeah.
And then we look at education. And we're not just talking
Yeah.
about formal education, how smart
Yeah.
you are and how intelligent you are, how wise you are.
Yeah.
Because you ever notice when we get, especially I'm talking about men now, I'm leaving the women out of this.
Yeah.
But as men, we tend to posture up. We got to one up people on how much we
Yeah.
know. All you got to do is go on social
Yeah.
media and see how much people try to impress you by how much they know. And
Yeah.
so it's not just formal
And
education.
and even athleticism, starting from boys, right? I mean, look at me, man. I'm an old man now, and I still think I can do things on the basketball court that I can't do, and when I can't do it, I feel really bad about myself, right? I mean, I'm a loser. I'm
Jim,
you know.
that goes to the fourth Asian. Guess that fourth Asian.
Okay, go ahead, keep going.
Reputation.
Reputation. There you go.
Now, let's go back to this high school athlete. Who am I if I'm
Yeah.
not the high school quarterback anymore? Who am I if I'm not the
Exactly.
head cheerleader? Who am I if I'm not
Yeah.
the class president? Who if I'm now?
That's right.
Who am I now if I'm not LeBron James anymore, dominating
Yes.
the sport? See, that
Yeah.
goes back to reputation. How many people like you? What people think about you? How many likes
Yeah.
you get on Facebook and social media? How many people are following you on Twitter and on Instagram? All that speaks to our reputation. How many women find me attractive? How many
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
find the women attractive? It's
Yeah.
all about reputation of being liked and loved because we're searching for something.
My wife and I tease each other all the time. I'll come home and she'll say, "How was your day?" I said, "Well, I'm just beating off those girls one at a time. They're all after me."
That's the reputation part. Now,
Right.
here's the fifth Asian. The fifth Asian
Right.
is intimidation. We
Okay.
define ourselves as men based on how strong we are, how we can get
Yes.
other people to fear us, how
Yeah.
we can get somebody to respect us.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because and so you don't have to be the biggest guy in the room, but you want to have that power that people
Yeah.
have. You intimidate people, and now
Yeah. You got to be the best at
at
something, even if it's
right.
even if it's ping pong. You got to
You
be
got
the
to be the
best.
best because that
Yeah.
speaks towards your intimidation factor. So you're talking
That's right.
about occupation, compensation, reputation, intimidation, all these Asians. But you know what we're not
That's
talking
good.
about when it comes to identity? Guess what we're not talking about? What about your relationships? We don't define
Yeah.
ourselves based on the relationships we build with the people we love. What about defining yourself based on maturation? Are you growing? Are you improving year to year? And not just
Yeah.
celebrating a birthday because of your age, but celebrating your birthday because of your growth. What about motivation? What is driving you to do what you do? Your
Hmm.
motives. Your motives. What about that? What about generations? About what are you leaving
Hmm.
behind, your legacy when you're leaving behind when you're gone? All
Yeah.
these things we're defining ourselves by, basing on our identity, but not once did we ever ask, but I know what I do. I know what people think about me. I know what people said about me. I know what people have done to me. I know what people haven't done for me. And all this is part of my identity. But not once did I ask this, but what does God say about me?
Hmm.
Who does he
Hmm.
think I am? And Jim, if you
Hmm.
don't mind, I want to bless your listeners right now with something we do. We do this internal, but I want to bless your listeners with this. It's called our real man reality. Because I
Please.
know about all the other stuff that they're trying to define themselves. But let's see what God says you are.
Yeah.
And what I do
Yeah.
is I have our guys, they close their eyes, and I want to, now unless they drive and don't close your eyes, but I want them to close their eyes and listen. And I want them to hear, even though they hear my
Yes.
intonation, I want them to hear the voice of God speaking this to
Mm.
them. Because this is
Mm.
what God says about us. Not your occupation, not your compensation, not your reputation, not intimidation, not all that, not education, but this is what God says about you, that you are powerful because my spirit lives and dwells within you. My beloved, you are valuable to me. And I can prove it because I sacrificed my only son just
Mm.
for you.
Mm.
So when I look at you, my child, I don't even see your sins, and they are many, but I
Mm.
don't see them. I see the righteousness of my son, Jesus Christ. Therefore, I know what you've done, but come to me because I consider you blameless. You should come to me unashamed because I declare you holy, set apart for great and mighty things. See, my child, this is your new born again identity in my son, Jesus Christ. So as I renew your mind daily, according to my truth, not your mama, not your daddy, not your past, not your trauma, not your problems, not your fears, not your doubts, not your insecurities, not your rejection, not your past relationship, not through your children, not through your spouse. When I renew your mind daily according to my truth, I will grant you something called grace that I never run out of, that will give you access to that kind of grace that will allow you to live, to love, and to lead your family righteously. Any questions, my child? Now, Jim, if I could get every listener who heard that to not, they know it, but to believe it in their heart. No more divorces.
Yeah.
No more addictions.
Yeah.
No more abandonment. No more condemnation. No more self-righteousness. No more judging. If we can believe that, that's what I'm trying to get our guys to define themselves based on what he says you are, not what you think you are, but what he says.
Yeah, and you're never done hearing that. You're never done digesting that. It's something that has to be a constant, going back to Psalm 1, when it talks about,
look, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners,
or
nor
sit
sits in the seat of scoffers, but he
Yeah.
delights in the word of the Lord.
And he meditates on it
day
and night. Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
You got to keep it in front of you. So
Yeah,
I don't
that's
just say
right.
that real in reality. I recited that to you, and it's not in front of me because I say it every day, Jim, for myself.
And that was the assignment. That was the assignment given to the men at my house the other night. I want you to memorize word for word with exact punctuation. Pick what translation you want, but make sure that you get it word for word, not sloppy memorization, not kind of in the neighborhood, word for word, because the battle is real and every word is powerful. Every period, every semicolon, every colon, every comma, every piece is so important. That is powerful. What are your hopes and dreams for this ministry that you, how long ago did you start this? Did you say?
It was 8 years ago, back in 2016.
Yeah, 8 years ago officially, but it sounds like it's been going on in your life since you had your wake up call.
Yeah. Nobody ever asked me about when did because if you went back to that time, I would say now I was 38. So you're talking about now 17 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, I got to put in full confession. It was 17 years ago. God had given me this vision 7 years prior to 2016. I was like Jonah and I ran away from it.
Yeah.
So I didn't confess that to the audience, but I'm telling them now. I knew it when I saw that happen, but I was like, God, because now let's get real, Jim. When God told me, okay, that's the real problem, men. Now the human side kicked in. So what do you want me to do? So I want you to leave this and I want you to go work with men. But God, I'm getting paid a lot of money to do this, right? How am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to provide? He says, I will provide. Okay, but you mean I got to go ask people for money now? Like that, right? And Jim, I'm just telling you the truth. I didn't accept it like, oh yeah, let's do it. No, I tried to control it. Well, okay, I'm gonna do a little bit of this, do a little of that, and I failed every time until I had to cut it all loose.
You know what? What you and I are talking about right now, let's just admit it, is really foreign to a lot of men, but not to all men. If you let me parallel with you down this highway for a second, just with my own little story. The first thing I would say to the listeners is that, if you're kind of being drawn into this black hole of abstractness in our world today where you don't know what to believe, I would just suggest that you go back and you study the claims of Christ and the resurrection of Christ, because Yeah, and we'll just say it. Joe and I will just say it. If Christ didn't resurrect, then everything's a gamble.
Right.
It's a guess. But if Christ did rise from the dead, ladies and gentlemen, that is a game changer.
Yep.
That's a game changer. With that said, let's talk back to men here, and maybe ladies, gain some wisdom on this. So once upon a time, I was a junior vice president for Bank of America in Southern California. And I felt a calling to work with street kids in Los Angeles because I had been exposed to things being a late police chaplain. I was exposed to some things in the policemen's lives that I did not recognize that they went through, the kids in the streets and what they were going through, because I was raised in kind of an Ozzie and Harriet home. I was kind of sheltered, opposite of a lot of men. I had a wonderful father. And I took it for granted. I didn't understand. I was so naive. And so when I saw some things that included anguish and pain and literal blood, it changed me. It changed me. I couldn't concentrate on the loans at the bank. I couldn't concentrate on increasing the margins for the bank. I couldn't concentrate. Mm-hmm. And I threw myself into this calling to be a pastor. My first day, I walked into a little church and nobody was there to greet me. And I walked away from an office where I had, in those days, we called them secretaries, Dr. Joe. We called them secretaries. Today, they have different titles, but I had two secretaries, had a beautiful office, had a private office and a public. Bank of America had a, I don't know if they still do, but in those days, we had to have a desk out on what we called the platform where the customers could get to us, because A.P. Giannini, the founder of Bank of America, that it happened during the San Francisco earthquake, and he wanted us to be available. But outside hours, we could, go into our office. And so, there was prestige. I had the title, had a country club membership as part of my role, at the bank. When I walked into my new office, it was previously one of the church nurseries. So I walked into a shag carpeting that was probably 25 years old. There were dried boogers on the wall. It was a phone system, and it was just a rude awakening, right? So my identity was lost. I went from this junior VP to this. What am I doing here? What mistake have I made? And then, of course, as I grew in the ministry, I was filling a pulpit every Sunday, and then after a while, I felt a calling to leaders. And so, as I stepped out of the pulpit, so to speak, into a different kind of pulpit, I experienced pulpit addiction. I lost my identity because if I wasn't speaking to a crowd every single week, even though I thought I was a spiritual man, I thought I was a maturing man, I thought I was a man teaching, even in that world, you find that, man, I'm still a man, right? And I still struggle with my identity. Today, when I work with men, many of them don't understand that progression where to be a man is to know your sense of, you have a sense of purpose, and purpose is more powerful than preference. Mm-hmm. Your purpose begins to override and direct preference. It means, no, I choose this, and here's why I choose it. Not because it's the easy path, because I have purpose in it. So sometimes, men, listen to this. Sometimes maybe what we need to remember is that if you look at it biblically, the best thing you can do in life is to love your wife. Because that's probably the best thing that you can give your kids. Mm-hmm. If you can hand your kid, if you're married, and you can hand your kids an example of not a perfect marriage, but a good marriage, a marriage that's working hard, and that overflows into parenting, you are going to be present for your kids. If you can't be present for your wife, it's going to be tough. Now, if you're not married anymore, man, and what Dr. Joe is talking about, you got to be present in yourself and understanding where you stand with God. And if you can do that, and then you can be present in the life, and just being present. Sometimes, do you think, Joe, that that in our attempts of being present with our kids, for me, it's my kids and my grandkids, and you experience something you don't like in your kids and in your grandkids, I think sometimes we get mixed up fixing what we don't like versus simply being present, being that rock. Because when they do come to their senses, if you have shamed them, if you have guilted them, they're not going to run to you. They're going to run to something else. So strength looks different in different contexts. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you throw yourself in front of the bullets, and sometimes you just have to be present even when they're doing stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And figuring that out. What do you say to that?
It reminds me of a very important and humbling lesson that I learned probably in maybe year one, well, about year two of doing this full time. I told you I left a very lucrative and very profitable career to do something, start something from scratch. You're talking about now moving into my 50s, getting ready, pushing 50. And I'm thinking I was scared to death. And I'm going to put this in the context of what you're saying because it applies. It's been 8 years now doing this ministry, and there hasn't been a week that's gone by that I haven't cried.
Wow.
For 8 years. I didn't cry that much when I was in education.
Yeah.
And the record has been in 1 week, I cried 16 times in 1 week. And that's working with grown men.
What'd you do? Count it?
Oh yeah, I did because I've been crying so much. I say, okay, this week is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a rough week.
And it was 16 in 1 week. I shared it with our men too. But here's the thing: by year 1.5, 2, I'm about God. This is too hard. It not only was it hard to get it up and running and launching to get it to where it is now, it was hard because I kept seeing men fail.
Mm-hmm.
The marriages still were falling apart.
Yeah.
The addictions were still happening. And I'm thinking, God, you called me to this, and we're basing this on your word. We're giving them the support they need. They're no longer ABT. They've been taught better. They have a safe place. They can go doing all the right things. Now, I want you to keep it in context of what you said as a parent. I'm trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, but my kid's going sideways.
So I'm loving the wife. I'm being a good example and a role model for my kids, and they're still going to jail.
Yeah.
They're still addicted to porn and meth, and they're still stealing. They're still cutting themselves. They're still having suicide ideation. But God, I'm doing it the way you told me to do it. Now I understand there's men who are messing this up.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to do the right thing, and I'm being there for my kids. I'm doing so. I was saying that in the ministry. And I said, and I was confiding in one of my mentors, and who kind of inspired me to even get into this. And I was telling him, he asked me how I was doing, and I said, I'm doing horrible. And he says, why? I said, because why are there still divorce? Why are there still separations? Why are these men still stuck in addiction? And how come they're not reaching for the life preserver? I said, all these support. And he said something to me that changed everything. And this is the answer addressing what you just said about being present.
Mm-hmm.
He asked me, he says, Joe, I hear you. And I understand your concern because he's been doing ministry longer than I have. He said, but Joe, I'm not there, but can I ask you some questions and can you be totally honest? And I want every parent out there to ask themselves the same question. Okay? Whether they're a parent or they're leading the ministry like you and me, leading an organization, boss, the same question applies. He said, Joe, let me ask you something. I said, sure. He says, Joe, have you been there for these men when they needed you the most? I said, yeah. Have you provided them with the support that they need? I said, yeah. He said, have you put community around them? I said, yeah. Hey, have you prayed for them and interceded and prayed and fasted for them? I said, yeah. Have you teaching them based on the word of God? Have you used the word of God to teach them? I said, yeah. He says, have you been transparent and open and honest about your struggles and your successes and being totally honest with them and being transparent and vulnerable with them? I said, yeah. He said, have you committed to them? Yeah. He said, have you kept your word to them? They said, yeah. He said, so what you complaining about? Right. And I said, because I'm not seeing the results. I said, I don't
Oh
understand.
my
They're
gosh.
still
I
failing.
was
And this is what he told
I
me
was
that changed.
I was not
But
expecting
watch
that.
this. This is what changed everything. I said, because they're still failing. They're still divorces. And I'm doing all. He said, I said, that's my point. He said, yeah. He said, but see, I see why you're upset. He said, because
Mm,
you've been trying to you've been trying to be successful.
mm,
I said, huh? He said, that's why you're failing. Because you're trying to be successful. I said, what's the alternative? To be a failure? He said, no, God didn't call you to be successful.
mm.
He called you to be faithful.
Yeah.
And everything you told me was you
Yeah.
being faithful. But you're
Mm,
complaining because you're not seeing the results that you
yeah.
want. It's not about the results. It's about you
Mm,
showing up, being there, and being faithful. So when you stand before God, when you die, he says, well done, my good and what? Successful servant?
yeah. You're right.
Oh,
Right.
employee of the year
Yeah.
servant? Dad of the year
Yeah.
servant? No. He going to say, well done, my good and faithful servant.
Yeah, and as a leader, when you get into that mode, you simply focus on all that's wrong, not what's right, not what has. Because I bet you that even during that time where you were weeping 16 times, there was a lot of good stuff going,
Yeah.
but you were in a mindset where you were only seeing, and then you were locking in and focusing, and therefore magnifying what wasn't working, what's not working, or maybe even I dare say, blind it for just a little bit to see what, here's just a theory, brother to brother, blind it for just a little bit so that when your eyes were open again, you were once again revived with passion because you do see results, but you do still see a lot of work to do.
Mhm. And I tell you, know what we're talking about this. I'm gonna show you how vicious this cycle is about identity.
Yeah.
Because here I am doing all the quote right things. I'm being faithful, like Howard said. I'm not trying to, And but here's the thing. My question is, I say, man, he's right. I've been faithful. So how come I'm not rejoicing? And here's the problem,
Mm.
Jim. Because there's still a part of me that the success is going to be my identity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we
Because
were talking
I'm
about,
getting
right?
reputation.
Right.
I did it. I did
Yeah.
it.
Right.
And see, that's why God is not concerned about our success. Because
Yeah.
success can breed idolatry
Yeah.
and makes you think you're better than what you are. But if I'm based it on faithfulness, whatever happens, I'm thanking God for it. Because that had nothing. I had nothing to do with the results. All I was obedient. God, look what you did. You saved that marriage. You helped them break that addiction. I didn't do anything. I was called to be a servant, not a savior. And so I'm getting my identity caught up again in what I do.
You know, Joe, you just reminded me that's why we're not just propagating the gospel. We too are consumers of the gospel, because the gospel is never a one and done
Mhm.
situation, is it? When we think about our theology, salvation is really, I was saved. I was justified at one point in my life when I believed I was saved. I'm being saved
Sanctification,
right now, and I will be saved in glorification,
glorification.
and
Right.
the resurrection. And so that is why I have to keep going through the cycle myself. It's a constant cycle, and that was beautiful. What that conversation that you had with your mentors. I want to make another comment just about that in itself.
Mhm.
Um, for those who are men that are listening and you're slugging it out, do you have a mentor? Do you have a mentor? Really would encourage you to have not just a mentor, but surround
Yeah.
yourself with
Yeah, I got 6. Surround yourself
yeah,
with mentors.
yeah, and we all need it. We never get too old for them.
And you
Some
can
of
never
my
have too many.
Yeah, that's right. And Dr. Joe, some of my mentors are younger than I
Yeah.
am now.
Oh, Jim, you're gonna
I
love
mean,
this. You know what I tell my son all the time? My son just turned 28 yesterday. And I always tell him, I said, age doesn't make you mature, it just makes you old.
that's
So
right.
you can learn. I said you can learn from you. Mentors can be younger than you if they're more mature than you in certain areas. The
Yes,
person who helped me
yes.
launch my podcast, Jim, the dude was 26 years old, who showed me how to
Hmm.
launch a podcast that took us to being the top rated podcast for Christian Men on Apple Podcast. I didn't know what I was doing. He taught me how to do it.
That's awesome.
And he asked me my goal. He said, Joe, what's your goal? I said, well, I hope that we can get maybe 10,000 downloads by the end of the year. He says, Joe, if you do what I'm telling you to do, and he was 26 years old, he said, Joe, you'll do that you'll do that every week. And I thought he was crazy. And guess what? He was right. Because now we're 3.8 million later.
That's wow.
But I learned, but I'm telling you, I learned from a 26-year-old. He was my mentor in podcasting. So age don't make you mature, it just makes you old.
That's right. I resemble that remark. Hey, Joe, I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for being a participant here in the Today Counts Show. How do people learn more about Real Men Connect? How do they get in touch with you, and how do they learn more about what you're doing?
That's real easy, because how they get in contact with me is through the name. What do real men do? They connect. So go to realmenconnect.com, and they can, everything they would need to know and every question they would have could be on that first page when they go there, because they can find me on social media through that page, but realmenconnect.com. But I will share this with them as for those out there who, if this message is resonating with them and they're thinking, wow, I would love to be able to contact them personally. What we do, we have a limited number of slots that I try to open up every week. And I'm going to continue to do it until every time the slots gets filled up. But I let guys who are listening out there be able to set up a call with me for free. If they go to realmenconnect.com/call, CALL.
Beautiful.
That's it. And they can pick the breakthrough call option, because that's a limited number of slots I have just for the public. And if they filled up, I'm sorry, just wait till the next week and see if you can find a slot. But realmenconnect.com/call and pick the breakthrough call option, and they'll get to talk to me just no different than you're talking to me right now, Jen.
Well, Dr. Joe, I've enjoyed this so much that I'm going to stick my neck out there and say, I think you and I are going to talk again, and we might even work on some projects. Some projects together, because I need more partners in what I'm doing. And I really enjoyed it. I got a ton of notes here and just enjoyed talking to you. And for those of you listening, I really encourage you to reach out to Joe and see what happens. Joe, thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If you're not part of the Lead Today community, let me invite you. Go to leadtodaycommunity.com. That's leadtodaycommunity.com, and sign up for Monday Moments. It's a weekly email that will encourage your leadership. Again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for telling a friend about the Today Counts show.